Cold Currents. The Fossick Lane Mysteries. Book 2. By Wynne Valentine. Copyright 2026 by Wynne Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, without written permission from the author, except for the use of brief quotations in a book review. Chapter 1. Winter Harbor. The fog comes, same as it always does in December, and I'm caught between the inventory shelves with a stack of moon phase almanacs in my hands when the knowing hits. Not the fog itself, that's still 2 hours away. The sense of something shifting. The way Quill goes rigid in his nest of paper shavings and stares toward the harbor like he's listening to something I can't hear. I set the almanacs on their shelf with deliberate care, slowly, because touching things in the Fossick has become complicated. 2 months of practice, and my psychometry is getting stronger, which sounds useful until you realize it means you can't straighten a picture on the wall without getting a flash of who hung it and why. The shop is full of objects with opinions, and they all want to tell me theirs. What is it? I ask Quill, moving toward the front window. My hedgehog doesn't answer in words. He never does. Not really. But I get a feeling burst. Alertness. That particular flavor of animal awareness that means something's shifted. The harbor air, maybe. Winter storms are coming in thick off the Pacific, and the water's behaving strangely even by Crabapple Bend standards. The shop window frames the harbor perfectly. The marina where fishing boats bob like anxious beetles. The tide pool stares dark against the rocks. And beyond that, the restless line where Rogue River becomes ocean. It's December now, and the winter winds have turned everything sharp-edged. Tarpaulins flap, lines creak. The air tastes like salt and coming weather. I don't actually see the research team until my eyes adjust. There's a woman in a heavy parka directing 2 men as they secure equipment near the water. Even from this distance, there's a focused intensity about her. The way she checks each line twice, the way she points with precision. Early 30s, maybe. Hair pulled back in a braid that's come loose. She's the type who doesn't notice the braid is loose because she's thinking about something else entirely. Visitors, I murmur to Quill, who has now moved to a position directly under the window. He doesn't respond, but his ears have the flattened look that means he's concentrating hard on something. Nolan comes down the street then. I recognize his walk before I register it's him, which is its own kind of complicated. Harbor master, weather magic practitioner, recently 5 times over reason for me to rearrange my entire life into shapes that include less eye contact. He's moving with purpose toward the marina, his weathered jacket already half-buttoned against wind that hasn't quite arrived yet. The woman with the loose braid watches him pass. Something in her expression shifts. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. It's gone almost immediately, replaced by a return to her surveying equipment. I finish the inventory of the shelves, checking the ledger twice even though nothing needs double-checking. It's a good excuse to stay in the back where I don't have to decide how my face looks when I'm thinking about Nolan. The problem with small towns is that everyone notices everything, and the problem with me is that I'm still learning to distinguish between guarded and paranoid. By 5 o'clock, the research team has disappeared from the marina, probably settled into a B&B somewhere in town. The boats are still there, though, the small research vessel tied off with professional efficiency next to the larger fishing charters. Something about the precision of those knots bothers me. Something about the woman in the parka. I'm locking the register when Quill goes rigid again, not the early warning rigidity from before. This is different. This is the feeling he gets when he senses something specifically wrong. My hands go still on the cash drawer. Outside, the harbor hasn't changed. The fishing boats are still bobbing. The sky is still the particular shade of gray that means winter on the southern Oregon coast. But something in the quality of the light has shifted, and my palms are suddenly cold. I touch the shop counter to steady myself, and the psychometric hit is immediate and overwhelming. Gretchen's hands, my great aunt's certain movements, the weight of her doing this same motion 1,000 times before me. But underneath that, something newer, a vibration, a tightness in the air around the harbor, like a rope drawn too taut. I know, I whisper to Quill, who doesn't uncurl. I feel it too. The feeling persists as I move through the closing ritual, straightening the reading chairs, banking the fire in the back room, checking the wards that Gretchen installed decades ago, and that I'm still learning to maintain. Wards are older magic, the kind that requires intention and belief layered into paint and intention. They keep the shop safe in ways I don't fully understand, but I maintain them anyway, because Gretchen did, and because the town depends on people knowing how to keep protected magic alive. By the time I lock the front door, the harbor is disappearing into the afternoon gray. The research vessel is a dark shape against darker water. The marina lights are coming on in that particular way that suggests someone's concerned about the coming storm. And Quill has returned to his evening nest without explaining what specifically triggered his earlier alarm, which is entirely in character. The walk home takes me past Petrichor Coffee, where Bee is closing up with the kind of efficient movement that suggests she's already heard the news about visitors from the university. Sugar glider confetti is on her shoulder, and Bee's expression has that watchful quality that comes from decades of running a business in a magical town where research could mean exposure. There's a marine researcher in town, she says, which confirms it. The gossip network in Crabapple Bend operates faster than electricity. University of Washington, studying seabed mineral composition. Is that a problem? I ask, though I can feel from the tightness in the air that yes, actually, it might be. It depends on what she finds, Bee says, and there's something in her tone that suggests she's thinking ahead to problems we haven't encountered yet. It depends on whether anyone cares about her findings. It depends on a lot of things that haven't happened yet, but that people are worried about anyway. That's how news travels in magical towns. Not as facts, but as anxieties, as predictions of problems, as people protecting things they haven't let anyone know they're protecting. I head home as the evening fog begins its arrival, rolling in from the ocean in that deliberate way that suggests intention. Not just weather, something with purpose behind it, something responding to the disturbance in Crabapple Bend's delicate balance. Quill settles onto my shoulder as I walk, and I feel the return of his earlier sensation. Alertness? Yes, but also something closer to warning, the kind of feeling he gets when predators are moving in the dark, or when storms are about to break through what everyone's been pretending is peace. By the time I reach my cottage, the fog is thick enough to erase the street behind me, and I'm thinking about a woman with a loose braid, and a harbor that's behaving strangely, and Nolan moving with purpose towards something I don't yet understand. The storm hasn't broken, but it's coming, and everyone in Crabapple Bend is holding their breath waiting for the water to fall. Chapter 2. The Drowning. The call comes at 5:47 a.m., which is the kind of detail that matters when someone's dead. Sheriff Louisa Restrepo herself walks into the Fossick at 6:30 with her uniform still rain-damp and her expression carved from granite. I'm not open yet. I'm standing in the kitchen with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I haven't touched, and I know something is wrong before she even says the words. Quill had woken me at 5:30 with a feeling burst so intense it pulled me from sleep like someone yanking a rope. Not fear, exactly, but urgency. The kind of sensation that means something has shifted from potential danger into actual harm. By the time Louisa arrived, I'd already changed clothes twice and found myself standing at the window watching the fog for signs. There's been an incident at the marina, Louisa says, not the woman I know who usually makes small talk about Quill's appetite. This is Louisa in work mode, and she's never been to my shop before the business day in 7 years of my living here. I need you to come down there. Nolan said you might see things. The walk to the marina takes 12 minutes. The sun hasn't fully risen, and the fog is in full sentry mode over everything, thick and deliberate. Louisa doesn't talk as we walk, which is how I know it's bad. We pass Petrichor Coffee and I see B through the window, already moving in that hyper-aware way that means the town network has already transmitted the basics. Not all of them, but enough that the coffee shop is functioning as a disaster center for managing collective anxiety. The marina is controlled chaos. There's a boat, a small research vessel I recognize from yesterday, and next to it, on the dock, a figure under a tarp. The coroner's van is already there. 3 state police officers I don't recognize are photographing the dock boards, and Nolan is standing separate from all of it, staring at the water with the expression of a man who's seen something that fundamentally altered his understanding of his own territory. He looks up when we approach, and our eyes meet for exactly long enough that I remember the feel of my hand on his arm in the dark. And then I look away first because I'm still the person who learned to do that in her last marriage. Dr. Petra Lindgren, Louisa tells me quietly, found floating in the marina at 5:30. Nolan spotted her during his morning water check. The woman from the university, I say. From yesterday. Yes. The thing is, Louisa gestures toward the water. It's smooth. Impossibly smooth. Not a ripple, not a suggestion of current. The marina is sheltered, sure, but winter mornings usually have at least some chop. This looks like someone smoothed it with a hand. This looks intentional. This looks like magic. Louisa doesn't say that last part out loud, but I hear it anyway. Can I ask, gesturing toward the dock. Louisa nods. She's learning to trust my particular usefulness, even when it makes her uncomfortable. The dock railing is worn, salt-smoothed wood that's been gripped by thousands of hands over dozens of years. I let my fingers rest against it, and the psychometric hit arrives like a wave. Salt and hands and fishing trips, and small moments of pride in a job done well. But underneath all that, something newer, something sharp and cold. Deliberate purpose. Someone held onto this railing with intention. Someone was here, and they wanted something specific to happen. The emotion attached to it is layered. Not sadness, not anger. Something more complex. Something that tastes like belief. I pull my hand back and breathe through it. Quill, who's under my jacket, presses closer against my ribs. The water in her lungs, the coroner says, appearing from behind the van with a clipboard and the particular gravity of someone who's spent decades bearing bad news. It's not marina water. The composition is all wrong. Heavy mineral content. Doesn't match anything in the surface harbor. I look at Nolan. He's looking at me. Something passes between us. A recognition, an understanding that the normal explanation for death by drowning has just become considerably more complicated. The coroner continues, his voice steady and analytical. The minerals suggest deep water origin, possibly from a source we haven't identified. The oxygen levels in the water are unusual, and there's no water aspiration in the trachea. She didn't struggle to breathe. It's almost as if the water was forced into her lungs with purpose. Nobody says the word magic, but it's there in the humidity of the fog, in the way the water refuses to ripple, in the precision of whatever happened to this woman overnight. They cover her again, and I watch as the coroner's team prepares for transport. The research vessel sits empty and professional, all its equipment secured with the same precision I noticed yesterday. Someone cared about that boat. Someone maintained it with attention. Louisa pulls me aside. Your psychometry. What did you feel? Intention, I say. Deliberate action. And something else. A purpose behind it. Not rage, not desperation. Someone did this believing it was necessary. That's not something I can put in an official report, Louisa says quietly. No, I agree. But it's true anyway. The morning continues in that particular way that disasters continue. Interviews conducted, statements taken, the machinery of official investigation grinding forward while underneath it all, people are scrambling to manage what this means for the town's secrets. The woman with the loose braid is dead, and the water in her lungs comes from somewhere that shouldn't exist officially, and everyone in Crabapple Bend is suddenly focused on what they're not saying. I stay at the marina longer than Louisa needs me to, watching the fishing boats, watching the way Nolan's shoulders carry something heavier than they did yesterday. Quill provides feeling bursts at regular intervals. Distress, yes, but also the particular flavor of finality. Something has ended. Something has been decided. By the time I walk back toward town, the fog has begun to lift slightly, and I can see the distant shape of the tide pool stairs where the research vessel had been collecting samples. The woman had been mapping something. The water in her lungs suggests she found it. The question becomes, did she die because of what she found, or because of what she was about to find? And the answer, I'm already certain, will determine everything about what happens next. Chapter 3. Undercurrents. By noon, the entire town knows that the research woman is dead and the water in her lungs is wrong. By 1 o'clock, the theories are multiplying like bacteria in warm broth. By 2, I'm sitting at a corner table in Petrichor Coffee and listening to Kai Nakamura explain why he's not crying, even though his hands are shaking so badly he can barely hold his cup. She was thorough, Kai says. He's young, maybe late 20s, and the kind of person who was probably told to be grateful for opportunities his entire life. University of Washington, research assistant to Dr. Lindgren, here to study the unusual mineral composition of the seabed off Crabapple Bend. He looks like someone whose life has just become very small and very manageable, which is the kind of shock that takes a while to wear off. She always double-checked the safety gear. Always. B sets down a fresh coffee without being asked and squeezes Kai's shoulder. She's better at this than I am, the actual human comfort part. I'm still learning that it's not weakness to let someone cry near you without trying to fix it. Did she say anything yesterday? I ask, keeping my voice low. Anything that seemed off? Worried about anything? Kai shakes his head. She was excited. She found something in the seabed data that didn't match the published geological surveys. She said it meant the convergence was bigger than anyone thought. More complex. I exchange a look with B. Convergence. The word everyone in Crabapple Bend uses like it's a weather pattern instead of a place where 3 underground mineral veins channel magic. The fact that Kai said it so casually in the middle of a coffee shop means he doesn't know what he said, doesn't understand the weight of it. What time did you last see her? I ask. 10 o'clock last night. We were at the marina, finishing the day's data collection. She said she wanted to review the readings before we called it a night. I went back to the B&B. She said she'd follow in a few minutes. He looks away when he says it, and I notice the exact moment his eyes flicker toward the window. There's something he's not telling me, something layered under the shock. Across the cafe, Wren Haddock is sitting at the bar with her own cup of coffee, and she's watching Kai with an expression that's something like satisfaction. Wren runs the charter fishing business from the marina, and she's spent the last 6 weeks complaining loudly about how Petra's research vessel and equipment were disrupting the fishing patterns. Business has been slow. Equipment malfunctions have increased. Wren's been vocal about wanting the university off her dock. One less problem, Wren says, just loudly enough for our table to hear. That equipment was chasing away the halibut runs. Bee's lips press flat, but before she can say anything, Desmond Crisp comes through the door like he's walking against a strong wind, and Oracle the tortoise is sitting on his shoulder with the expression of an ancient philosopher observing human folly. Desmond heads straight for my table, his expression urgent in a way that suggests he's been holding something back and has finally decided he needs to talk to someone who might understand. "Teddy," he says, breathing hard from what looks like a significant walk up the hill from his archives. The mineral composition in Petra's research. If the convergence underwater is what she was mapping. He trails off, glancing around at the other tables. "We need to talk. Privately." He's right. The coffee shop is full of people who are pretending not to listen while listening, with the intensity of people who know that information is currency in Crabapple Bend. Bee's watching us with concern, and even Wren has turned back to her newspaper with the kind of focused disinterest that suggests she's paying attention to everything. I drink my coffee and nod at Desmond. "Tonight, at the Fossick, after I close." He nods back and takes his tortoise to a table in the corner, where he sits with the particular patience of someone who's learned to wait for revelations. Oracle settles onto the table with the grace of an ancient being who understands that the world's problems generally take longer to solve than most people anticipate. That evening, I'm closing the Fossick when Nolan appears in my doorway, like he's been considering whether to come in for the last hour and finally decided yes. He's still in his work clothes, and his hair looks like he's been running his hand through it repeatedly. The universal sign of a person who's spending all their mental energy on one unsolvable problem. "The water magic," he says without preamble. "It wasn't a storm. I felt it. Someone used water magic at the marina last night. The tidal patterns are disrupted. The currents show control, deliberate manipulation." I sit down. Quill emerges from his evening nest and waddles over to Nolan's boot, which he sniffs with the intensity of a forensic specialist examining a crime scene. "Someone killed her," Nolan continues, "using water magic, not drowning, deliberate magical interference. And Teddy, only someone who knows this town's magic would even think to try it." He stands by the window, hands gripped in fists at his sides. The weight of that statement settles between us like fog. Only someone from Crabapple Bend. Only someone who understood what the convergence was, what its water could do, how to use it as a weapon without leaving visible evidence. "Do you have a theory?" I ask, keeping my tone neutral. "Too many," he says. "Too many people with the knowledge and the capability. The old guard. People who've been maintaining the town's infrastructure for generations. People who understand that exposing the convergence would mean exposing everything about how this town actually works." "Petra threatened that," I say. "Her research." "Yes," Nolan says, and his voice is quiet enough that I have to listen closely. "Her research was accidentally creating a map of the town's biggest secret. And someone decided that couldn't be allowed." The evening deepens outside the shop windows. The fog rolls in. And I'm sitting in my great-aunt's shop surrounded by objects full of history, and I'm realizing that what happened to Petra wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was someone making a choice about what the town was allowed to know. It was someone deciding that some deaths are the cost of survival. Chapter 4. Readings. Nolan doesn't leave the shop, so I make tea. It's what I do now when I'm uncertain. I make tea and people gradually say things they wouldn't say with empty hands. He settles into the reading chair by the window, the one that belonged to Gretchen and still carries the impression of her particular way of sitting. The chair responds to his presence with a psychometric hum that suggests it remembers being occupied by many people who carried their own burdens. Nolan's is not unique, but it is heavy. "The convergence has an underwater component," he says after his first sip. He's looking out the window toward the harbor, not at me. 3 mineral veins: iron, quartz, and something we still haven't identified. They're not just on land. They extend beneath the seabed. Channel magic straight up from the bedrock. And Petra's research was mapping it, I say. It's not a question. I've already been thinking about this since Desmond arrived, talking in circles around words he clearly wasn't supposed to say. Not intentionally, but yes. Nolan's hands grip the mug like it's the only stable thing in the room. The convergence underwater is supposed to be secret. Not even secret. Just not something we talk about. Not something we let researchers map and publish. I think about Kai's hands shaking. The way he said Petra was excited about finding something bigger than expected. The flicker in his eyes when he said she'd gone back to the marina alone. Kai showed me some of her research notes, I say. He wanted me to understand what she was working on. The mineral analysis in the seabed samples. It described something that matched what I know about the convergence, the composition, the density, the way the readings seemed to suggest something underground channeling energy upward. If her research got published, Nolan starts, it would explain everything to anyone looking closely. I finish. But there's something else. The water in her lungs. The coroner said it had heavy mineral content. It didn't match the marina surface water. Nolan's cup stops halfway to his mouth. What? Deep water, I say. It came from somewhere deep. Somewhere the minerals would be more concentrated. The implications settle between us like fog. Someone used the thing Petra was trying to expose as the thing that killed her. Someone with knowledge and precision and access to the convergence's deep water. Quill hops into Nolan's lap uninvited, which is either a sign he's decided Nolan is trustworthy or that he simply doesn't care about social conventions before 7 p.m. Nolan absently scratches the space between his ears, and I notice the way his hand moves. Gentle, attentive, the hand of someone who's learned to be gentle with fragile things. Someone used convergence water to kill her, Nolan says slowly. That means they knew about the underwater component, and they knew how to access it, how to channel it with enough precision to use it as a weapon. Someone practiced in water magic, I add. Yes. We sit with that for a moment. The narrowing of possibilities, the way a murderer becomes less mysterious and more specific with every new detail. Louisa arrives at 7 o'clock with a warrant and apologies for the intrusion. She asks to examine Petra's research vessel while Nolan guides her to the marina. I stay behind, ostensibly to close the shop properly, actually because I need to touch things and let them tell me their stories. I move through the aisles of the Fossick with my hands steady and my mind open. I let my fingers brush against objects. A brass compass that belonged to a sea captain who died in 1952, an old leather journal that's full of pressed flowers and faded handwriting, a quartz crystal that someone found on the beach and kept for 40 years. Each object comes alive with history, with the weight of human meaning. Each one is a voice saying, I existed. I mattered. Someone cared enough to keep me. By the time Nolan returns, I've touched everything in the front room, and I feel saturated with the accumulated weight of human history. Gretchen is everywhere in this shop. Her choices, her preservation, her attentive curation of objects that deserve to be kept. Kai wasn't at the marina last night, Nolan says without preamble. His room at the B&B confirms he was there by 10:15. The owner vouches for him. He couldn't have done it. He's hiding something, though, I say. But not murder. No, Nolan agrees. But something. We sit with that uncertainty, the way you sit with fog when the weather won't clear. Outside the window, the harbor is settling into evening. The fishing boats are dark shapes against darker water. And somewhere beneath the surface, the convergence is pulsing with power that's older than the town, older than the binding, older than the protective spell that keeps Crabapple Bend isolated from the world. How many people in this town know about the underwater convergence? I ask. Not many, Nolan says quietly. The people who maintain the town's magical infrastructure. The people who've been here long enough to learn how things really work. And people who practice water magic specifically. Because you need to know to understand how to work with it safely. So we're talking about a specific group, I say. People with both knowledge and capability. Yes. Nolan looks at me, and there's something painful in his expression. And Teddy, I need to tell you something else. The water magic someone used last night. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, and they wanted Petra dead. The evening deepens. Nolan leaves eventually, moving back toward the harbor with the weight of his knowledge sitting on his shoulders. I lock up the shop and walk home through fog that's thicker than it should be, more deliberate than weather usually is. Quill settles against my neck, and I feel his sense of something shifting in the town's equilibrium. A death has occurred. Something has been decided. And the consequences are spreading like ripples in water, moving toward outcomes that haven't been defined yet, but are definitely coming. The fog follows me home, and I spend the evening sitting in my cottage, surrounded by silence, thinking about a woman with a loose braid and hands that checked safety equipment twice, and someone who decided her research was worth dying for. Chapter 5. The Old Guard. I spend the next day building a list. It's what I do. I organize chaos into categories and look for the pattern that makes everything click. Louisa is officially calling it an accident, drowning, wrong place, wrong time. But she's also making phone calls and having Desmond's restricted archives brought to the library conference room, which means she knows it's not an accident, but needs the time to prove it. Kai is suspicious because he's been secretive since Petra died. When I ask him directly about his involvement with Petra's research, his eyes flicker away, and he says something vague about collaboration and professional confidentiality. When I press, he admits they talked about the research constantly, but his tone suggests there's something he's not saying. He's haunted by her death. Yes, but there's also something like relief underneath it, and I don't yet understand why. Wren Haddock is suspicious because she had a public motive and didn't hide her feelings about Petra's presence. I watch her from Bee's cafe window as she moves between the charter boats, and she's efficient and competent and completely unconcerned with maintaining an alibi. When Louisa asks her where she was last night between 10 p.m. and midnight, Wren says she was at the Driftwood Tavern in Brookings, the next town over, which is easy to verify and harder to fake. Harlan Tate is the third name on my list, and I don't have a good reason for including him except that he's been a fixture at the marina for 40 years and therefore has access to everything, knowledge of the harbor's magic, and probably opinions about whether outsiders should be researching Crabapple Bend's geological peculiarities. Desmond finds me at the Fossick on the afternoon of the second day. He's carrying a stack of ledgers and maps so old they look like they might disintegrate if you breathed on them too hard. The Old Guard, he says, spreading materials across my counter. There's a group, informal, never officially named, that's maintained the town's magical infrastructure for 200 years. They were established when the binding was created. Their purpose is to keep the convergence's secrets and protect the town from exposure. I study the maps. They show the harbor, the tide pool stairs, the area where Petra's research vessel was collecting samples, and overlaid on top of them, in methodical handwriting from a century ago, are markers for something underwater. The convergence. Mapped and documented by people who understood exactly what they were protecting. Who's in this group? I ask. People whose families have been here long enough, Desmond says. People who've been trained in the town's magical infrastructure from childhood. It's not a formal appointment. It's just inheritance. Knowledge passed down. Responsibility assumed. Harlan, I say, and Desmond nods. His family has been fishing in this cove for 3 generations. His grandfather was one of the people who helped stabilize the town after the binding was established. He's part of it. Part of the protection. Harlan appears that afternoon, coming through my shop door like he's settling a debt. He's 58, weathered from decades of fishing, and he moves with the certainty of someone who's never questioned his place in the world. "Teddy Vane," he says, the familiar smile on his face that I've seen him use at town meetings and harbor gatherings. "Heard you might be curious about the research woman. The harbor's mine to protect. And I thought you might want to see where she was doing her work. See if you pick up on anything that could help Louisa." It's a reasonable offer phrased like a question, which means he's asking me to trust him while not actually requiring that I do. I say yes because refusal would make him suspicious, and I'm interested in what my psychometry picks up from his boat. The boat is called the Petrel, and it smells like honest work. Brine and diesel and the particular funk of a working fishing vessel. Harlan steers us out toward the tide pool stairs where Petra had been collecting her seabed samples, and he talks the whole way about the weather, the fishing runs, the way the winter is shaping up to be lean. The research site is marked by a series of buoys, and the water around it is deeper than it looks, the kind of place where the convergence's influence is strong enough to be noticeable. I can feel it, a pull like gravity but sideways, a concentration of magic that makes my skin tingle. Harlan cuts the engine and lets the petrol drift, and I move to the rail to touch the hull. The psychometric hit comes immediately. Old salt, years of fishing, protectiveness layered on protectiveness. But underneath all that, something scraped away. A place where something has been deliberately removed. "What was she looking for?" I ask, my fingers still on the worn wood. "Minerals," Harlan says simply. "Thought she could make a name for herself by proving something about the seabed. Thought the town would be fine with it. Didn't understand that some things are meant to stay quiet." His words have a double edge, and I feel Quill shift in my coat pocket. Not afraid, but alert. "What was scraped off your hull?" I ask. Harlan's smile doesn't shift, but something in his eyes changes. "Ward," he says. "Old protective spell. Didn't need it anymore. Decided to refresh the whole thing instead of patching." It's a reasonable answer phrased like a question, which means he's lying, and we both know it. I excuse myself from the boat and sit in the cabin while Harlan returns to the engine. The cabin is organized chaos. Charts, logbooks, equipment. The accumulated weight of decades of fishing. I let my hands rest on various objects, and each one gives me pieces of information. Harlan's attentive work, his respect for the ocean, his methodical approach to every problem. And underneath it all, something darker, something resigned, the feeling of a man who's made peace with making hard choices. When we return to the marina, the sun is beginning to lower itself toward the horizon. The Petrel is tied up at its usual mooring, and I use the excuse of examining the research site more methodically to make a detailed study of where the ward has been scraped away. The scraping is recent. I can see where the paint is still raw. Harlan didn't just let it fade naturally. He deliberately removed it. Someone who wanted to do water magic without anyone knowing his boat was involved. By evening, I've assembled my theory, and it sits in my mind like something heavy and difficult to carry. Harlan Tate is the person with knowledge, capability, and motive. Harlan Tate removed the protective ward from his boat. Harlan Tate has spent his life protecting the town's secrets. Harlan Tate killed Dr. Petra Lindgren, but I can't prove it. Not yet. Not without understanding exactly what he scraped off that hull, and why someone in the old guard would think that murder was the appropriate response to a researcher. Chapter 6. Deep Water. I return to the marina at sunset, when the light is thin and gold and the fishing boats cast long shadows on the water. The Petrel is tied up at its usual mooring, and I use the excuse of examining the research site more methodically to make a detailed study of where the ward has been scraped away. Wards are common on boats in Crabapple Bend. Protective spells painted on the hull to prevent magical detection, to keep a vessel invisible to the subtle senses of the magical practitioners who occasionally need to know what everyone is doing and where they're going. They're not sinister. they're practical. But removing one means you want to do magic without anyone knowing your boat was involved. The scraping is recent. I can see where the paint is still raw. Harlan didn't just let it fade naturally. He deliberately removed it, scraped it clean, prepared the surface for something else entirely. I find Nolan at the harbor master's office, which is a small weathered building that smells like salt and administrative paperwork. He's reviewing charts, the kind of work that probably doesn't require this much concentration, but gives him something to focus on, that isn't the fact that someone murdered a woman in his harbor. Wards, I say, sitting down without being asked. How do they work? Who maintains them? Wards are practical magic, Nolan says, setting down his charts. They prevent detection. If a practitioner is looking for magical signatures, a ward makes you invisible. They're refreshed once a year in this town, usually in spring. Someone skilled paints the spell on the hull, and it lasts until weather and time wear it away. And if someone removes one deliberately, he looks up. Then they want to do magic without being hidden. Want to do it in a way that can be traced back to their location. Or someone's trying to hide that they removed it, I say. Show me, Nolan says, standing with the immediacy of someone who's been waiting for permission to move. We walk to the marina in the failing light, and there's something about walking with Nolan that still makes my skin feel slightly too small for my body. He's competent and present, and not trying to convince me of anything, which is the kind of baseline trust I learned to be suspicious of in my last marriage. But I'm learning, slowly, painfully, that not everyone is trying to move the goalposts. The patrol is quiet, everyone out at the fishing grounds or in town. Nolan examines the scraped spot, running his fingers over the raw paint with the intensity of a blind person reading Braille. The water magic around him rises like heat shimmer, not aggressive, but present, focused. This is fresh, he says. And the removal wasn't clumsy. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They wanted the ward off quickly and quietly, but they didn't care about leaving evidence. Why would someone remove a protective ward? I ask. Nolan steps back from the boat. If they wanted to practice magic without the ward protecting them from magical detection. Water magic specifically, maybe. Something they wanted to work on but didn't want anyone to sense. Can you demonstrate? I ask. Water magic? So I understand what we're looking for? He hesitates for exactly one beat, then walks to the edge of the dock. The water below is dark, reflecting the last of the sunset. He holds his hand out, and I watch as the surface shivers. Not from wind, but from intention. The water rises in a gentle spiral around his fingers, obeying the subtle pressure of his will. It's beautiful in a way that makes my chest tight, the way power becomes visible through control. That's control, he says, and the water settles back into stillness. That's what you need to kill someone with water magic without leaving visible evidence. Control and knowledge of what water can do if you tell it the right thing. The water settles, and Nolan turns back to me. He's close enough that I can see the gray threading through his hair, and I'm close enough that Quill has decided this is too intimate and has stuck his head out of my coat pocket with a judgmental expression. Nolan notices and almost smiles. Your hedgehog doesn't like me, he says. Quill doesn't like anyone, I say, which is a lie. Quill likes whoever has food or interesting opinions about boundaries. Someone on that boat used water magic the night Petra died, Nolan says, his voice quiet. I can feel the signature in the water around the dock. Someone channeled convergence water with enough precision to force it into her lungs. Someone practiced enough that they left almost no trace. Harlan, I say. Nolan's expression hardens. I don't want to believe that. Neither do I say. But the facts align. The ward removed, the water magic, the knowledge of how deep convergence water would work. Access to the boat, access to the harbor, access to everything. Harlan's been on the harbor maintenance committee since I took over as harbor master, Nolan says. He's kept this water safe for decades. He's the reason the fishing boats don't get caught in the convergence's strange currents. He's the reason this harbor works. Maybe that's exactly why he killed her, I say, because he loves this harbor enough to kill to protect its secrets. The moment extends, the kind of moment that goes somewhere, or doesn't go somewhere, depending on whether you let it. I look away first, toward the harbor and the boats and the dying light. Behind us, the tide pool stairs are dark against the rocks, and somewhere under the water, the convergence is pulsing with power that's older than the town itself. We need to tell Louisa, Nolan says quietly. I know, I say. We stand there for a moment longer, the two of us caught between the evidence and the community, between justice and compassion, between the pull of logic and the weight of knowing that someone you respect might have committed murder. The fog begins to arrive, rolling in from the ocean with that deliberate quality that suggests the weather itself is responding to the disturbance in the town's equilibrium. Tomorrow, Nolan says finally, we'll tell Louisa tomorrow. Tonight, I need to sit with this. I need to understand how someone I've known for 40 years could decide that killing was acceptable. And I understand that burden, that terrible knowledge, that responsibility of knowing someone's secrets and being the one who has to decide what to do with them. We walk back toward town in the gathering fog, and the harbor disappears behind us like it's being erased from the world. But it's still there, still pulsing, still keeping its secrets in the deep water below. Chapter 7. The Maps. The ward research takes me to Desmond's archives, which is a basement room under the library filled with books that predate the town's official founding and boxes of documents and handwriting that predates standardized spelling. Desmond is there with Oracle, who has apparently not moved from her favorite cooling rock in the last 6 hours. Wards are maintained by people, Desmond says, not looking up from a ledger that appears to be from some time in the 1880s. And ward maintenance is done by the people who understand magical infrastructure. In Crabapple Bend, that's traditionally been the old families, the people who've been here long enough to understand what needs protecting and why. Harlan's family, I say. Harlan's family has been fishing in this cove for 3 generations, Desmond confirms. His grandfather was one of the people who helped stabilize the town after the binding was established. There's a group, informal, never officially named, that's maintained the town's magical infrastructure and kept its secrets. We call them the Old Guard, informally. They're not villains. They're protectors. Oracle finally moves, not from her rock, but in some ancient tortoise way. A shift in her body language that suggests she knows something about this conversation that the rest of us haven't figured out yet. I spend the next several hours comparing Petra's seabed data with the old maps of the binding's architecture. Desmond walks me through the process, how to read the underwater mineral signatures, how to match them against the historical records, how to understand what Petra was actually mapping when she thought she was just collecting geological data. The maps align perfectly. Petra's research shows the exact location of the convergence's underwater component. The mineral readings describe the 3 veins, iron, quartz, and the unidentified third element. She was mapping the binding's infrastructure with scientific precision, and anyone sophisticated enough could have used that research to understand how to destabilize the protective spell that keeps Crabapple Bend isolated. If she'd published, Desmond says quietly, it would have been available to researchers globally. To people who might understand what the convergence is and what it could be used for. So someone killed her to prevent that? I say. Yes, Desmond says. And the old guard would call it necessary, would call it protection, would believe they were keeping the town safe. I visit Harlan at his home that afternoon, a small cottage on the hill above the marina that has the particular tidy chaos of a person who lives alone and has stopped caring about the state of the paperwork. He's on his porch, working on a net with the methodical precision of someone who's done this thousands of times. "Harlan," I say, and he looks up with the expression of someone who's been expecting this conversation. "The ward on your boat. You scraped it off deliberately. Why?" He sets down the net and considers me with the same evaluation he'd give to a new fishing line. "I keep the waters clean," he says finally. "That's what we do. That's what the old guard has always done. We keep this town's secrets, and we make sure the people who would expose us don't get the chance." The phrase echoes in my head. Keep the waters clean. In the context of a fisherman, it means maintaining the integrity of the harbor. In the context of someone who's just been discussing a dead woman, it means something else entirely. "Did you kill Petra Lindgren?" I ask directly. "I did what was necessary," Harlan says, which isn't a no. The research she was doing was going to expose everything. The convergence, the way the magic works, the infrastructure we've spent 200 years protecting. She was going to put it all in a paper, and that paper was going to reach people who would want to exploit this place. I couldn't let that happen. I don't move. Quill is a small weight in my coat pocket, waiting. "I didn't mean to be cruel," Harlan continues. "I waited until she was alone, made it quick, used the convergence water because it felt right, using the thing she was trying to expose as the thing that ended her research." The confession hangs between us like fog, not defiant, not ashamed, just stated as fact. A thing that happened, a thing that needed to happen, a thing he'd do again if the circumstances demanded it. I leave him sitting with his net and walk back down the hill as the fog begins to arrive. It's thicker than usual, more deliberate, and I can almost feel it responding to the disturbance in the town's equilibrium. Someone has been killed. Someone who threatened the order of things, and the fog knows it. The walk takes me past the marina, where I see Kai trying unsuccessfully to send an email from the research boat's router. There's a desperation in his movement, and I realize suddenly what his secret has been. He's been selling Petra's research data to someone, and now she's dead, and he's trying to cover his tracks. It's small, and it's desperate, but it's not murder. By the time I reach the Fossick, the fog has engulfed everything beyond 10 feet of the door, and the light inside is warm and contained. Quill settles on the reading chair, and I stand surrounded by Gretchen's objects, surrounded by history and weight, and the accumulated choices of people who came before me. Harlan's confession changes everything. This isn't a mystery anymore. This is a question of what happens when someone does something terrible for reasons that make sense to them. When someone commits murder believing it's necessary. When the town's survival and a woman's life balance against each other and someone decides what matters more. I don't call Louisa immediately. I make tea instead. And I sit with the knowledge that I'm going to have to report someone I've come to respect for a crime I understand him committing. I'm going to have to choose between community and justice, between protecting people I love and protecting the principle that murder is unacceptable regardless of motive. The fog outside the window is impenetrable, and somewhere in that fog, Harlan Tate is sitting with his nets, knowing that his secret is out, knowing that the waters he kept clean have become complicated, knowing that his daughter, Sarah, and his son, Marcus, who've grown up in this town and will grow up carrying the knowledge of what their father did, will have to live with that weight their entire lives. Chapter 8. Harlan. The next morning, I don't call Louisa immediately. First, I need to understand what Kai was doing at the research boat, why he's trying so desperately to delete files, why his hands are shaking when he thinks no one's watching him. I find him at 7 a.m., before the town is fully awake, working on the research vessel with the intensity of someone on a deadline he can't explain. He's systematically trying to delete files from Petra's laptop while maintaining the facade that he's organizing her research for the university. Kai, I say, stepping onto the boat. Stop. He freezes, and I watch the calculation happen behind his eyes. Fight, flight, or confession. He chooses confession, which is the kind of choice that suggests he's been waiting for someone to catch him. I didn't kill her, he says immediately. I didn't, but I was selling her research to a geological survey company. I needed the money, student debt, living costs, everything. They were paying me to copy her data and send it to them, but I didn't kill her. Why are you deleting the files? Because Petra's dead, and the files are valuable, and if I'm responsible for her death in any way... He breaks off, running his hand through his hair. I'm not responsible. But I'm also someone who benefited from her research being taken seriously, and now the police are going to look at everything she did, everything we did, and they're going to think I had motive. You did have motive, I say, just not murder motive. The confession is a relief to him. He sits down on a bench and looks like someone who's been carrying something unbearable and has finally been allowed to put it down. He admits it all when I call Louisa, the names of the companies, the dates, the amounts, the terms of the agreement. It's theft. It's academic misconduct. It's probably 8 different violations of research ethics. But it's not murder. Louisa arrives with state police and a warrant within the hour. Kai confesses fully, and there's a kind of relief in his face when he does. The truth is lighter than the lie. He's arrested, but with understanding, by an officer who understands that sometimes people do small, terrible things before they understand the magnitude of their choices. By afternoon, Nolan appears at the Fossick without knocking. He looks like he hasn't slept, like he's spent the night wrestling with something too heavy to carry. The water magic, he says. I felt it again this morning. The tidal patterns at the marina show someone worked water magic here between 11 p.m. and midnight the night Petra died. The precision is remarkable. Someone who knew exactly how much force they needed, exactly how to direct it. Not an accident, not an experiment. Intentional killing. Harlan said he did it, I tell him, watching his reaction. He said she was going to expose the town. He said he kept the waters clean, which I now understand means he killed people who threatened Crabapple Bend's secrets. Nolan's expression hardens. Harlan wouldn't do that. I know him. He's protective of the town, but he wouldn't... He scraped off the ward on his boat. He removed his magical signature from the location. He knew exactly how to use water magic to kill someone without physical evidence, and he admitted it when I asked him directly. He confessed to you? Nolan asks, and there's something in his voice that sounds like pain. Without hesitation? He said it was necessary, I reply. He said he kept the waters clean, that he'd do it again if the situation demanded. Nolan looks out toward the window, toward the harbor that's still obscured by evening fog, and I can feel him working through something internal, something about responsibility and community and the cost of protecting people you love. We need to tell Louisa, he says finally. I know, I say. But Nolan, if the Guardians, if this group Harlan belonged to, if they've been protecting the town for generations, then this is bigger than one murder. This is about what the town thinks it's allowed to do to survive. That doesn't make it right, he says. But he's looking at me like he's wondering if I understand the impossible position he's in. Caught between the community he loves and the knowledge that his community may have decided killing is acceptable when survival is at stake. I call Louisa from the Fossick, and she arrives with an expression that suggests she's not surprised, just disappointed. Desmond comes with her, Oracle riding on his shoulder like a benediction. They go to arrest Harlan at his cottage, and I watch from the coffee shop window as the patrol car pulls away from the hill above the marina. Harlan comes peacefully. Apparently, he's been expecting this. Apparently, he understood when he confessed to me that confession to the amateur investigator meant confession to the police, that there's no secret protected by the old guard anymore, just the slow working of justice and the understanding that some burdens are too heavy for communities to carry alone. By evening, the Fossick is full of people who are trying very hard not to talk about what happened. They buy things they don't want. They look at books they don't read. They sit in chairs that belong to Gretchen and struggle with the knowledge that someone they knew, someone they respected, decided that murder was the appropriate response to a threat. B comes in around 6 o'clock with a thermos of soup she shouldn't have had to make, and we stand in the back room without talking. Sometimes that's what community is, just standing near someone else who understands that something terrible has happened and will never be fully explained or understood. The old guard, B says finally. My mother used to tell me about them. Said they were necessary, that they kept the town safe from people who would exploit the binding. I never understood until now that keeping things safe sometimes means being willing to hurt people. That's the part that changes things, I say. The moment you believe that hurting someone is necessary. Nolan comes in as the sun sets, moving through the shop with the particular heaviness of someone who's spent the day processing impossible knowledge. He sits in the reading chair, Gretchen's chair, and he looks smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of understanding that the town he's sworn to protect has been maintaining secrets darker than he knew. He said he'd been protecting the waters for 40 years, Nolan says. He said everything he did was in service of keeping the convergence safe, keeping the town safe, keeping the binding stable. He said Petra's research would have made it possible for someone to weaponize what we've been protecting for 200 years. Did he understand what he was doing? I ask. Did he know that killing her was wrong? He knew, Nolan says. He just decided that wrong was acceptable in service of a greater good. And that's what frightens me. That he's probably right. That Petra's research could have been weaponized. That the old guard's fears aren't unfounded. That sometimes protecting people requires making choices that hurt other people. I sit down on the floor next to the reading chair, and Quill settles onto my lap. We stay like that for a long time, Nolan in the chair that belonged to my great-aunt, me on the floor of a shop full of objects with histories, and between us the understanding that something has broken in this town that might not be repairable. What happens next? I ask. Trial, Nolan says. Justice. The legal system does what it's designed to do, and we all have to live with the outcome. And I have to figure out how to maintain the binding knowing that the person who's been helping me maintain it for decades is in jail for murder. Outside, the evening fog continues to roll in, and somewhere in that fog, Harlan Tate is sitting in a cell, knowing he protected his town, knowing he committed murder, knowing that those two things are now forever connected in a way that can't be separated. The chapter closes not with resolution, but with the beginning of something harder. The slow work of justice, the painful process of community reckoning, the understanding that sometimes protecting what you love means destroying it in the process. Chapter 9. The Guardian's Logic. I haven't slept properly in 3 days. The psychometric hit from Harlan's cottage is still sitting in my chest like a cold stone. Salt water, deep convergence, hands that moved with purpose. Purpose that felt less like rage and more like religious conviction. The hands of someone who believed they were doing necessary work. Sheriff Restrepo sits across from me in the Fossick's back room, where the afternoon light comes sideways through the window and makes everything look slightly unreal. She's got a notebook open and a pen poised, waiting for me to stop circling around what I need to say and actually say it. You think it's Harlan? She says. Not a question. I know it's Harlan. I push my coffee away. The cup's been empty for 20 minutes. The psychometric reading is unmistakable. Someone with water magic, someone who accessed the deep convergence deliberately, someone whose emotional signature is protective rather than angry. Harlan fits all of that. You also know that psychometric evidence isn't admissible in court, Restrepo says, and that accusing the harbor master's assistant of murder based on feeling readings from touching his cottage is going to require actual evidence. I know. My hands are shaking slightly, so I sit on them. That's why I need your help. Restrepo nods slowly. She's learned to trust me over the course of this investigation, but trust and legal proof are different things. What do you want to do? Visit him. Together. You asking questions officially, me watching his face, learning what I can from the objects in his house. There has to be something. Equipment he used. Water that hasn't evaporated. Something that connects him directly to what happened at the marina. That's a lot of something, Restrepo says. But she's already closing her notebook, already moving toward action. The sheriff in Crabapple Bend has learned that direct is sometimes more efficient than procedural. I call Nolan first. Not to warn Harlan. That wouldn't be right. But because I need him to know what I'm doing. Nolan takes the call in his office, and I can hear the ocean behind him through the open window. I'm going to Harlan's, I tell him. With Restrepo. I think he did it. The pause is long enough that I can hear his breathing shift. You're sure? Yes. Then yes, go. And Teddy, stay alert. Harlan's not dangerous like people with anger are dangerous. He's dangerous like protection is dangerous. Like something that's been twisted into a weapon over decades. Harlan's cottage sits at the edge of the harbor, where the town proper starts to fade into wilderness, and the sound of waves becomes the dominant conversation. Restrepo knocks, and I stand behind her with my hands in my pockets, trying to look official despite being a curio shop owner who reads feelings from old objects. Harlan answers the door in work clothes, worn flannel, fishing boots that still smell of brine. His smile when he sees Restrepo is pleasant, the kind of smile that's been practiced for decades of community interaction. When he sees me, something flickers across his expression. Recognition, maybe. Understanding that I know something. Sheriff, he says warmly. And Teddy, this is unexpected. Everything all right? Routine questions, Restrepo says, which is a lie both of us are comfortable with. May we come in? Harlan opens the door wider, and the cottage smells exactly like the psychometric reading suggested. Salt, ancient wood, something that's been slowly aging in darkness. He offers tea, which we accept because refusing would be suspicious. He moves through his small kitchen with the comfortable efficiency of someone who's lived alone for a long time. The conversation starts simple. Where were you the night Petra died? Were you on the water that evening? Do you know anything about her research? Restrepo asks these questions with the practiced ease of someone who's been doing this work for 30 years. Harlan answers with the calm of someone who has nothing to hide, or at least, nothing he's concerned about hiding. But as the afternoon light shifts, something changes. Harlan stops answering Restrepo's questions and starts talking to me. You're good at this, he says, refilling our teacups from a ceramic pot that's at least 100 years old. The psychometric reading is faint through the glaze, but it's there. Generations of hands holding this pot, pouring tea, having conversations that mattered. I can tell by the way you're looking at things. You're trying to read the objects, understand what they remember. I don't respond, but I don't look away either. My grandfather was like that, Harlan continues, settling back into his chair. He could touch something and understand its history. He used that ability to maintain the binding, to understand when the ward stones needed reinforcement, when the convergence's power was shifting. He taught my father. My father taught me. We've always been the kind of people who listen when objects have stories to tell. Is that what you told yourself? Restrepo asks. That you were listening to a story? Harlan's smile doesn't change. I told myself that I was protecting something that has been maintained by my family for 3 generations, that I was doing what was necessary, that some secrets are worth keeping at any cost. The words land heavy. Restrepo leans forward slightly, but Harlan's already moved past confession and into explanation. The convergence isn't just a feature of this town, he says. It's a living thing. It has power that could destroy civilization if it were weaponized. The binding keeps that power contained, stable, manageable. My family has been one of the caretakers of that binding since the beginning. We've accepted the responsibility, which means we've also accepted that sometimes protection requires sacrifice. Petra's sacrifice, I say quietly. Petra's research was mapping our defenses, Harlan says. Not because she was malicious, but because she was brilliant. She saw patterns in the data that no one was supposed to see. If her research had been published, if the academic world had started looking at what she'd documented, it would have taken maybe 5 years before someone figured out what the convergence really is. And then every bad actor in the world would have known where to look, how to attack, what targets would be most effective. The teacup is warm in my hands. The tea is too hot to drink, so I just hold it, letting the heat ground me. So you killed her, I say. I saved the town, Harlan corrects gently. And yes, that required her death. I regret that. But I don't regret the choice. Restrepo stands up slowly. Harlan Tate, I'm going to need you to come to the station to make an official statement. I'm not arresting you yet, but I am advising you that anything you say can be used against you in court. Harlan stands too, with the kind of calm acceptance that suggests he's been waiting for this conversation for weeks. He moves to put on his jacket, and I see the moment his hand touches the door frame. The frame holds generations of his family's presence. His grandfather standing here. His father. All the protectors stretching back through time. Harlan touches the wood like he's saying goodbye. After Restrepo takes him in, I stand alone in his cottage for another 10 minutes, touching things deliberately. The tea service, the photographs of his family, the ward stones he keeps on a shelf, carved with symbols I don't quite understand, but feel deep in my bones. Everything here speaks to one thing: a man who has lived his entire life in service to something bigger than himself. A man who believed that protection justifies killing. Nolan meets me at the harbor after sunset. We walk without speaking, down past the marina where Petra's boat sits empty and waiting for official release. The winter wind is cold enough to make breathing difficult, and the water is dark in a way that suggests storm systems forming far offshore. He didn't even deny it, I tell Nolan. Not in a way that matters. He explained it, he contextualized it, but he didn't deny that he did it. Harlan's been protecting this town his whole life, Nolan says. This is just the visible proof of what he's been doing all along. Keeping secrets, making sure nothing changes, believing that he knows better than anyone else what the town needs. We reach the edge of the tide pool stairs, where the town's public walking path ends and the rocky coast takes over. Nolan looks out at the dark water like he's reading something in its surface. His hand brushes mine as we stand side by side, and for a moment I think he's going to take it. For a moment I think that's what we both need. Contact. Confirmation that we're both still here. Still capable of connection despite everything that's complicated between us. Then he pulls his hand back, lets it drop to his side. We can't, he says quietly. Not yet. Not while everything's still tangled. I know, I say, but knowing doesn't change the fact that I want him to reach for me again. That I want him to close this distance and hold me while my world is reshaping itself around what Harlan has made me understand. That protection and harm are sometimes the same choice, just made from opposite directions. By the time I get back to the Fossick, Quill is waiting in the window with the kind of intensity that suggests he's been broadcasting my emotional state at maximum volume. I scoop him up, and he settles against my chest, sending feeling bursts that are complicated and worried and fundamentally supportive. Even hedgehogs understand that sometimes the people we care about do terrible things for reasons that almost make sense. Chapter 10. The Cup. The evidence arrives on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a state police officer who's gone through Harlan's fishing shack with the thoroughness of someone who understands that murderers hide things in plain sight. It's a cup. Wooden, intricately carved, and immediately recognizable to anyone who understands the older magical practices. A water-drawing cup, the kind of artifact that helps channel convergence water, making it visible and manipulable by someone whose magic isn't naturally that powerful. Restrepo shows it to me in her office, and I pick it up with methodical attention, already knowing what the psychometric reading will tell me. The cup is warm to the touch, despite sitting in an evidence bag for hours, warm with residual magic. The reading comes through crystal clear, hands shaping water from deep places, the mineral taste of the convergence concentrated and drawn up from layers of earth and ocean that shouldn't be accessible to human magic, and beneath it all, the emotional signature, protective, certain, the hands of someone who believed they were doing necessary work. This is the artifact, I tell Restrepo. This is how he did it. He used this cup to access the deep convergence water, to make it manipulable by his own water magic. Without this, he wouldn't have had enough power to pull convergence water up to the surface and force it into a drowning victim's lungs. Restrepo nods, already expecting this. We're testing it for the mineral composition that was in Petra's lungs. Lab results should be back by end of week, but based on preliminary findings, it's the same water, same mineral composition, same magical signature. That's physical evidence, I say. That's concrete. That's what gets us a conviction, Restrepo agrees. She leans back in her chair, and I can see the weight of it settling on her shoulders. The realization that one of her constituents is a murderer, that the quiet fishing community she's been protecting for 15 years contains someone capable of this. We're bringing him in for formal questioning tomorrow. His lawyer's already been notified. He's going to claim he inherited the cup, that it's a family heirloom with magical significance but no connection to Petra's death. Will that hold up? Not once we establish that the mineral composition matches. Not once we can prove that this specific cup was used to channel this specific water into Petra's body. But it's going to be complicated legally. His family is going to fight this. The old guard is going to fight this. They're going to claim that releasing information about the cup's magical properties exposes the town's magical infrastructure to outside scrutiny. They'll lose that fight, I say. The evidence is too solid. Harlan is too guilty. Probably, Restrepo says, but there's going to be fallout. The town's going to have to decide how much of its magical history it's willing to expose in order to get justice for a dead researcher. Kai is waiting for me when I return to the Fossick, sitting in one of the reading chairs with the kind of nervous energy that suggests he's been waiting for a long time. He looks smaller than he did 2 weeks ago, less like a confident research assistant, and more like a kid who's been crushed under the weight of his own poor decisions. The evidence, he says without preamble. It's Harlan, right? The cup they found, that's proof. It's evidence, I tell him. Strong evidence. But between you and me, I think what you're really asking is whether you're going to be prosecuted for selling Petra's data. Kai's shoulders drop. Am I? Probably. The university knows. They're recommending prosecution. You broke the research confidentiality agreement, and you sold proprietary academic work without authorization. That's fraud at minimum, maybe theft of intellectual property depending on how they want to press it. I was scared, Kai says quietly. I was scared that if Petra discovered I'd sold her research, she'd fire me, and I needed the job. I needed the research credit for my academic record. I thought maybe if I could just get enough money together, I could disappear before anyone found out. Instead, you created evidence that could be used against you in court, I say. But listen to me. You didn't kill Petra. You didn't even know that anyone was going to hurt her. You made a terrible choice, but it's not the worst choice a person can make. Kai looks up at me with the kind of desperate hope that comes from someone who needs permission to stop hating themselves. Will you tell that to the prosecutor? Will you tell them I'm just a stupid kid who made a stupid choice? I'll tell them that, I say. And I'm going to recommend that you talk to Desmond about working with him on the restricted research instead. Desmond's been running the library's magical archives for 30 years. He knows how to keep secrets, and he understands the value of research that can never be published. If anyone's going to mentor you through being the keeper of dangerous knowledge, it's him. Kai's expression shifts slightly. Not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. Really? Really? But you have to accept that your academic career in the normal sense is probably over. You're going to spend the rest of your life doing research that no one will ever see. Can you live with that? Yes, Kai says, and he means it. Yes, I think I can. I think I deserve that, actually. To spend my life knowing something important that I can never tell anyone. It seems like appropriate punishment. It's not punishment, I tell him. It's service. You get to protect something that matters, which is what you should have been focused on from the beginning, instead of trying to steal your way to academic legitimacy. After Kai leaves, I spend the afternoon thinking about the weight of secrets and the cost of protection. Harlan killed Petra to keep the convergence secret. Kai sold Petra's data because he was scared and stupid. The old guard has been maintaining the binding in silence for 200 years. And I'm caught in the middle, knowing too much to be comfortable, and not knowing enough to be certain I'm doing the right thing. Around 5 p.m., Nolan appears at the shop door. He's wet from rain, and his hair is falling across his forehead in a way that makes my chest tight. The cup is admissible, he says without preamble. I just got off the phone with Desmond. The old guard is willing to concede that allowing the cup into evidence is acceptable if it means keeping the broader details of the binding's architecture out of public court proceedings. They're negotiating the trial, I say slowly. They're being pragmatic, Nolan corrects. They understand that Harlan is going to go to prison regardless. They also understand that the best way to minimize damage to the town is to let the evidence speak for itself and not fight the conviction. Let Harlan be punished, let justice be satisfied, and then everyone moves on. That's not how it works. Once a trial starts, information comes out. Lawyers ask questions. The water comes from somewhere, and people are going to want to know where and why and what it means. I know, Nolan says. He moves deeper into the shop, running his hand along the shelf of old books like he's looking for answers in their worn spines. But the alternative is fighting, which means a trial that drags out for months, which means more testimony, more details, more exposure. Sometimes accepting the lesser harm is the most pragmatic choice. Sometimes accepting the lesser harm is just another way of protecting secrets, I say. Nolan stops touching the books. He turns to face me, and his expression is raw enough that I have to look away. Yes, he says. It is. And maybe that's what we deserve, to spend the rest of our lives protecting secrets that get people killed. Maybe that's the cost of living in a town built on magical foundations. I don't have an answer for that. So instead, I reach over to the small cabinet where I keep tea, and I brew 2 cups in the same ceramic pot that Harlan used to serve me tea, while calmly explaining why he drowned someone. The irony is not lost on me. Neither is the fact that Nolan accepts the tea gratefully, and for a moment, just a moment, we're 2 people drinking tea together without all the complications pressing down on us. It doesn't last, but it's enough to remind me that there are moments, scattered throughout difficult times, where connection still feels possible, where 2 people can sit together and pretend that the world makes more sense than it actually does. Chapter 11. The Ward. Nolan takes me to the convergence 3 days before the winter solstice. We don't discuss it beforehand. He simply appears at the Fossick at sunset and says, "It's time. You need to see it." The way he says it suggests he's been waiting for the right moment, the right convergence of circumstances and emotional readiness. We go at dark, when the harbor is empty of fishermen and tourists, and anyone who might ask inconvenient questions about why the harbor master and a curio shop owner are headed below the tide line with flashlights and deliberate intention. The entrance is hidden behind a natural rock formation that juts out from the cliff face, the kind of place that looks unstable and dangerous unless you know the spells that stabilize it. Nolan's hands glow faintly blue as he touches the stones, whispering something in a language I don't recognize. The rock face shimmers, becomes something less solid, and suddenly we're walking into a passage that shouldn't exist. The tunnel descends at a gentle angle, and the sound of water grows louder as we move deeper. Not the crash of surface waves, but something more fundamental, the sound of water magic flowing through stone, centuries of accumulated power pressing against boundaries that have held it contained since the binding was first established. The first caretakers carved this passage, Nolan says as we walk. His voice carries differently down here, bouncing off stone and water, creating harmonics that feel almost musical. They wanted direct access to the convergence without having to rely on natural cave systems. This tunnel was built specifically so that the old guard could reach the ward stones and maintain them. How often do they need maintenance? I ask. Constantly. The convergence wants to expand, to push outward, to escape the boundaries we've imposed on it. Every single day, someone from the old guard comes down here and reinforces the wards, reasserts the boundaries, reminds the magic that it's bound and contained. The water sound grows louder, and suddenly the passage opens into an enormous cavern. Water fills most of it, not quite flooding but present, aware, powerful in a way that makes my breath catch. The cavern ceiling extends upward into darkness that the flashlights can't penetrate, and embedded in the stone walls are symbols. Dozens of them. Hundreds of them. Ward stones carved and reinforced and maintained by generations of guardians. Nolan's hand finds mine as we approach the water's edge. His touch is steady, anchoring me. The convergence itself seems to be looking at us, the water stirring without wind, creating patterns that suggest consciousness. "Touch the ward stones," Nolan says, "but be prepared for what you're going to feel." I release his hand and move toward the nearest carved stone. It's warm to the touch, and the psychometric reading that comes through is overwhelming. Not just Harlan's grandfather, not just his father. I'm touching centuries of hands, generation after generation of guardians who understood that their responsibility was to keep something dangerous contained. Their hands on this stone, their magic flowing into these symbols, their determination that the convergence would stay bound and controlled. The reading is so powerful that my knees buckle. I'm on the stone floor without remembering how I got there, and Nolan is helping me up, his hands solid under my elbows. "I know," he says quietly. "I know what you're feeling. The weight of it. The realization that these aren't just protective spells. These are chains. Generations of people have been willing to spend their lives as jailers for the convergence's prisoners." "It's so angry," I whisper. The water below is churning now, pressed against the boundaries, testing them with a desperation that's almost sentient. It wants to escape. It's been trying to escape for 200 years. "Yes," Nolan says, "and people like Harlan have been deciding that the convergence's imprisonment is more important than individual human lives, because if the convergence escapes, if it becomes unbound, the power it would release could destabilize the entire region, maybe the entire continent." I push myself upright and move deeper into the cavern, drawn to the water despite every part of me screaming that I shouldn't touch it. Nolan follows, staying close, making sure I don't fall into the dark liquid that thrums with barely contained power. What would happen, I ask, if the binding failed? If the convergence got loose? Natural disasters, Nolan says. Earthquakes, tsunamis, magnetic storms that would disable every electronic device within 100 miles. The convergence is a nexus point where multiple layers of magical power intersect. Letting that loose would be like opening a dam and hoping for the best. So Harlan was right, I say. The realization is bitter and thick. Petra's research was dangerous. If it had been published, if someone had figured out how to attack the ward stones, they could have destabilized everything. Harlan was protecting something real, Nolan agrees. He was also committing murder to do it. Both things are true simultaneously, and that's what makes this unbearable. I touch another ward stone, this one older than the first. The psychometric reading is from the original caretakers, the ones who established the binding in the first place. I feel their desperation, their determination, their understanding that they were creating a spell that would need to be maintained by their descendants forever. They knew what they were doing. They accepted that. They decided that the price was worth paying. And then they died. And their children inherited the responsibility. And the children's children. And on, generation after generation of guardians, until someone like Harlan could look at a woman doing research and see her as a threat serious enough to justify drowning her in water that was never meant to touch human skin. The binding is weakening, Nolan says. His voice is so quiet I almost don't hear it over the sound of the convergence pressing against its boundaries. Vernon's death in the last book created a crack. The magic that he was maintaining is now distributed among people who don't have his power or his experience, and the convergence is getting stronger, pushing harder, testing the boundaries more aggressively. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I didn't have answers, Nolan says, because the only solution I could see was to train more guardians, and that would require expanding the circle of people who know about the convergence. And the more people who know, the more likely it is that the secret gets out. The more risk there is. So you carried it alone? Yes. And I was wrong. Harlan carrying the protection alone, me carrying the knowledge alone. We're both just creating more desperation, more justification for terrible choices. The cavern shudders slightly, and small stones cascade down from the ceiling. The convergence's power has increased perceptibly. I can feel it now, even without touching the ward stones, the pressure of magic straining against boundaries that were designed 200 years ago for a different world. What happens next? I ask. Someone needs to stabilize the binding, Nolan says. Someone needs to reinforce the ward stones before the cracks widen, and whoever does that is going to have to accept that they might be maintaining something that caused a murder. We'll find a way, I say, though I don't know how. We'll figure it out. Nolan pulls me toward him, and for a moment I think he's going to kiss me. Instead, he just holds me, his hands on my back, his mouth against my hair. It's not romantic. It's desperate. It's two people clinging to each other in front of something that's both beautiful and terrible, trying to convince themselves that human connection is more powerful than magical catastrophe. The convergence churns below us, and I understand for the first time exactly what Harlan was protecting. Not secrets. Power. Destructive, world-ending power, held back only by 200 years of sustained magic and committed people willing to make difficult choices. Understanding that doesn't make his choice right, but it makes it slightly more forgivable. And somehow, that's worse than if it had been truly evil. Chapter 12. Evidence. Sheriff Restrepo builds the case with the kind of methodical precision that suggests she's been doing this work long enough to know that details matter more than intuition. We spend a week coordinating evidence, testing water samples, establishing chains of custody that will hold up under legal scrutiny. The wooden cup tests positive for convergence depth water residue. The mineral composition matches exactly with what was found in Petra's lungs: ancient salt, rare trace elements that only exist in water that's been filtered through the deepest convergence layers. This isn't circumstantial. This is physical proof. The timeline is solid. Harbor security records show Harlan's boat leaving the marina at 9:47 p.m. on the night Petra died. His fishing logs claim he was checking crab traps, but the location is wrong. He didn't go to his usual grounds. Instead, he went to the research site where Petra was conducting her deep water surveys. The same location where Nolan showed me the convergence ward stones. The place where the boundary between protected magical space and exposed world is thinnest. I provide a psychometric reading to Restrepo's evidence file, describing the emotional signature I felt from Harlan's cottage, and the cup and the dock where Petra's body was found. Protective certainty, I call it, trying to put into words the feeling of someone who believed they were doing necessary work. Restrepo listens without judgment, understanding that in Crabapple Bend, psychometric evidence carries weight, even if it doesn't in other jurisdictions. He had water magic capability? Restrepo asks as we sit in her office 3 days before the winter solstice. Minor capability, I say. Nolan says that Harlan isn't a particularly powerful practitioner, but water magic is his family's tradition. They've been working with it for generations, and the cup is a tool that was designed specifically to help people with minor water magic access deep convergence water. With the cup, even someone with moderate abilities could manipulate convergence water with precision. Precision enough to force it into someone's lungs, Restrepo says. Yes. Restrepo sets down her pen. I'm going to need you to sign off on this as a formal statement, not just your psychometric reading, but your assessment of his capability, motive, and opportunity. I'll do it, I say. The statement takes 3 hours to write. By the time I'm done, I've described Harlan in terms that suggest someone who is simultaneously sympathetic and completely guilty. A guardian who killed to protect. A man who murdered based on protective instinct. A person who should go to prison, despite the fact that I can understand the logic that brought him to that decision. Wren comes to the Fossick the day Restrepo finalizes the evidence package. She looks destroyed. Thinner. Grayer. Moving like someone who hasn't slept properly in weeks. She sits in one of the reading chairs without being invited, and the weight of something settles onto her shoulders. I knew it was him, she says flatly. When Petra died, when the water wasn't from the surface, I thought about who would have access to deep convergence water. I thought about Harlan, about his family's history. But I didn't say anything. I didn't tell the sheriff. I just didn't say anything. You couldn't have known he would kill her, I say. But I suspected he might do something to stop her research. I knew the old guard was concerned about her mapping. I knew Harlan was the most protective, the most dedicated to keeping the town's secrets. And I still didn't warn her. I sit down across from Wren, and I recognize the expression on her face because I've been wearing it myself. The weight of complicity through inaction, the understanding that knowing something and not acting on it is its own kind of choice. There's nothing you could have done that would have mattered, I tell her. Harlan would have done this regardless. He was going to protect the binding no matter what. It just happened to be Petra who triggered that protection instinct. That's not comforting, Wren says. No, it's not. Wren leaves without saying anything else, and I return to closing out my shop, counting the register, doing the work that keeps my business functioning even while my entire worldview is being shattered by the realization that I live in a community where murder can be justified by necessity. Restrepo arrests Harlan the morning of the winter solstice. It's the same day the crabapple tree finally stops its out-of-season blooming and returns to dormancy. Coincidence? Probably. But the timing feels significant anyway, like the universe is marking this moment as a turning point. The arrest happens at dawn, with the kind of quiet efficiency that suggests Harlan has been expecting it. He comes to the dock in his fishing clothes, watching as Restrepo reads him his rights. He doesn't resist. He doesn't deny anything. He simply accepts the handcuffs and the gravity of what's happening. I did what was necessary, he says as Restrepo is placing him in the patrol car. His voice carries across the harbor, reaches Nolan on the dock, reaches me standing on the edge of the marina. The town will understand that. The old guard will understand. History will understand. He's wrong. History will call it murder. The legal system will call it premeditated homicide. The town will fracture over whether his intentions make his actions forgivable. But in the moment, Restrepo just nods and closes the car door, and we watch him disappear down the coastal highway toward the county detention center. The harbor is oddly quiet after he's gone. The fishing boats bob peacefully. The tide pool stairs are empty of walkers. It's like the entire town is holding its breath, waiting to understand what comes next. I stand next to Nolan on the dock, and we don't speak. Speaking seems dangerous now, like words might break something delicate that we're all trying to keep intact. The convergence below us pulses quietly. The wardstones are holding. For now, everything is stable. But both of us know it's temporary. Both of us understand that the binding is weakening, that Harlan's arrest is just the beginning of something larger. The winter storm is still building offshore. The fog will arrive in the evening. And somewhere in the town's magical infrastructure, cracks are widening, waiting for the next rupture, the next terrible choice, the next murder that might be necessary. For now, though, we just stand together and watch the harbor, letting the evidence speak for itself. Chapter 13. Dark Moment. The crisis arrives at 3 a.m. I'm lying in the apartment above the Fossick, staring at the ceiling, and the weight of everything settles onto my chest like a physical thing. I've solved the murder. I've identified the killer. I've given Restrepo the evidence she needs to take Harlan to trial. By any reasonable measure, I've done my job. But the more I think about it, the more I understand what comes next. The trial will be public. The motive will be public. And the motive is that Petra's research was mapping the binding, which means the trial will inevitably reveal the binding's existence, which means the town's 200-year-old magical secret is about to become very, very public. Harlan goes to prison. Yes. But the price of that justice might be the destruction of everything he was trying to protect. I get out of bed and pace. The apartment is small enough that pacing becomes its own kind of confinement. Just movement in a circle that gets me nowhere. Quill senses my wakefulness and emerges from his enclosure, climbing onto my shoulder with the specific weight that hedgehogs are good at providing. He presses against my neck, sending feeling bursts that are worried and supportive and fundamentally exhausted by my capacity to spiral. At 4 a.m., I make coffee that tastes like despair. At 5 a.m., I sit on the shop floor with Quill and consider just letting it go. Not saying anything. Letting Harlan disappear. Making his arrest quietly end because he's gone and no one presses charges. Because the alternative is destroying everything the binding has been protecting, and maybe Harlan was right. Maybe some secrets are worth keeping at any cost. The thought makes me sick. By 6 a.m., I'm moving between the shop shelves like I'm searching for answers in old things. I touch objects with methodical attention. A music box from 1932, a mirror frame from the 1800s, a collection of buttons that have been sewn onto coats and lost over decades. Each one has a story. Each one holds the weight of someone's choices. And none of them know the answer to what I'm supposed to do when justice and protection conflict. Quill climbs down from the shelf where I've been letting him wander, and he moves directly to my feet. He doesn't send a feeling burst. Instead, he just sits there, his small presence grounding me. I know, I tell him. I know I'm spiraling. But Quill sends a surge of something fierce. Hedgehog outrage. tiny and burning and impossibly determined. It's the feeling he gets when something is wrong, and he doesn't care how small he is. He's going to push back against it anyway. It stops my pacing. I think about Petra, 35 years old, brilliant, curious, dead because someone decided her life mattered less than protecting a secret, not because she was malicious, not because she was trying to destroy the town, just because she was asking questions and didn't know that asking questions in Crabapple Bend could get you killed. I pick up the photo of Petra from the investigation file that's sitting on my counter. She's smiling in the picture, standing in front of her research equipment on her boat, proud of the work she's doing, proud of the discovery she's making, not knowing that discovery and death were going to become the same thing. She deserves justice, I say aloud, even if the truth is complicated. Speaking it out loud makes it real, makes it impossible to take back. Quill climbs back onto my shoulder and settles there, his small weight somehow containing an entire ocean of support. I shower. I put on clothes that don't smell like despair. I make coffee that might actually taste acceptable. And I call Restrepo. I need to talk about what happens when Harlan's trial becomes public, I tell her. I need to know what you've prepared for the inevitable revelation that the binding exists. Restrepo is quiet for a long moment. Desmond has been working with the old guard. They've agreed to allow the trial to proceed without fighting the evidence, but they're also preparing a narrative that they think will minimize public panic. Which is that Petra discovered something about the harbor's unique geology that could have been weaponized by bad actors. That Harlan's family has been protecting that geological knowledge for generations. That his murder of Petra, while terrible, was motivated by genuine protective concerns for the town's well-being. So they're going to tell the truth but frame it in a way that doesn't mention the magical infrastructure, I say slowly. They're going to frame it in a way that sounds like a conspiracy to protect a secret rather than an attempt to contain magical catastrophe, Restrepo says, which means they're going to sound paranoid and controlling, but at least no one will think the convergence is actually a sentient supernatural entity that could destroy civilization. That's a distinction without a difference. No, Restrepo says firmly. It's the difference between a trial about protecting geological secrets and a trial that requires explaining how water magic works and why mermaids aren't real and how the convergence is actually a nexus point for multiple layers of magical power. One of those can be explained to a normal jury, the other cannot. I understand what she's saying. I hate that I understand it, but I do. Harlan's trial is going to expose the binding's existence, but only partially. It's going to open a door that the town's magical community will then try to slam shut again. And it's going to work, probably, because normal people don't believe in magic anyway. Conspiracy theories about geological protection are more believable than the truth. I'm worried about what that does to the truth, I tell Restrepo. So am I, she says. But I'm also a law enforcement officer and my job is to prosecute murderers. Justice for Petra comes first. Everything else is negotiable. After I hang up, I sit in the shop for another hour with Quill, watching the light move across the shelves as morning progresses. Quill has settled into a state of hedgehog judgment mixed with something like approval. He doesn't send any more feeling bursts. He just sits there. A small prickly animal next to a woman who's realized that sometimes doing the right thing means destroying things you want to protect. Around 10 a.m., I make a decision. I call Desmond. I need to meet with you about the trial, I tell him, and about Petra's research, and about what happens when the binding becomes public knowledge. Desmond agrees, and we meet at the library in the restricted collection room. Petra's research sits on the table, methodical mineralogical analysis, brilliant observation, the work of someone who was genuinely interested in understanding the convergence without understanding what understanding the convergence actually meant. She was going to figure it out, Desmond says, spreading the maps across the table. Not immediately, but eventually. Give her another year of research, and she would have realized that the mineral compositions don't match any known geological formations. She would have started asking questions about why the water down there behaves differently. She would have found her way to the magical explanation. So Harlan killed her to prevent her from learning the truth, I say. Harlan killed her to prevent her from learning a truth that would have destroyed the binding, Desmond corrects, because a published paper about impossible water behavior would eventually attract the attention of someone who understands magic well enough to weaponize the knowledge. And that justifies murder? No, Desmond says quietly, but it explains it. I look at Petra's research, and I see the moment where she was on the edge of real discovery, where one more methodical analysis would have revealed something supernatural. I see the brilliant mind that Harlan killed. She deserves justice, I say, even if it exposes the binding. I know, Desmond says, and that's why I've agreed to help Restrepo build the strongest possible case against Harlan. But I've also agreed that after the trial, Petra's research gets locked away, never published. Restricted access, kept in the library's secured collection so that no one can use her brilliant analysis to figure out how to destroy the magical infrastructure she accidentally mapped. That's not justice, I say. That's just hiding the evidence. That's protecting the town, Desmond says, which is what Harlan thought he was doing when he killed her. The irony is so complete and bitter that I almost laugh. But I don't. Instead, I go back to the Fossick and wait for the winter evening. The fog rolls in at dusk, settling over the harbor like it's been waiting for something. Like it knows that the balance of secrets and truths is about to shift. Like it's bracing for impact. Chapter 14. Confrontation. We visit Harlan one final time, Restrepo and me. The county detention center is sterile and fluorescent, everything designed to make people uncomfortable about their own existence. Harlan sits across from us in the interview room, and he looks smaller than he did in his cottage, diminished by confinement, by the reality of what's coming. Restrepo lays out the evidence methodically. The cup with its mineral composition matching Petra's lungs, the timeline of his boat leaving the marina, the psychometric readings I've provided, the water magic signature that connects directly to him. She doesn't accuse. She simply presents facts, allows the accumulation of detail to speak for itself. Harlan listens to all of it without interrupting. His hands rest on the table between us, and I can see how weathered they are. The hands of someone who's spent decades on the water, working with fishing lines and nets and the deep convergence's protected magic. You understand you're being charged with first-degree homicide, Restrepo says when she finishes laying out the evidence. Yes, Harlan says. You understand. The evidence we have is strong and will likely result in conviction. Yes, Harlan says again. And you still maintain that you killed Petra Lindgren? Harlan is quiet for a long moment. His eyes move between Restrepo and me, assessing something, deciding whether it's worth saying what comes next. I maintain that I did what was necessary, he says finally. His voice is steady, almost peaceful. Petra's research was mapping the binding's architecture. Not intentionally. She didn't know what she was mapping. But she saw patterns in the water chemistry that no one was supposed to see. She documented the weak points, the vulnerable areas, the places where someone with knowledge could attack the infrastructure deliberately. So you killed her to prevent publication, Restrepo says. I killed her to prevent the convergence from being weaponized, Harlan corrects. There's a difference. My family has been protecting the binding for 3 generations. We knew what would happen if that knowledge got out. We understood the stakes. And you decided that one person's life was an acceptable cost, I say. I decided that one person's life was less important than the lives of everyone in this town and everyone on this coast, Harlan says. His expression doesn't change, but something in his voice shifts, becomes more certain, more convinced. If Petra's research had been published, it would have taken 5 years, maybe 10, for someone to figure out how to weaponize it. And then people would come to Crabapple Bend. Not scientists or academics, bad actors, corporations, governments. All of them wanting to understand how to access and exploit the convergence's power, and any one of them could have succeeded in destabilizing the binding. That's speculation, Restrepo says. That's certainty, Harlan says. My grandfather protected the binding during World War II. He watched governments weaponize every form of power they could access. He understood what would happen if the binding ever became public knowledge. And he taught my father, who taught me, that protecting the binding required absolute dedication. Absolute dedication including murder, I say. Absolute dedication including murder, Harlan agrees without hesitation. Because that's what it takes. That's what it has always taken. The Guardians don't exist to maintain secrets. We exist to prevent apocalypse. Restrepo and I exchange a glance. She's heard enough. She stands up, which means the conversation is over. You're going to trial, Restrepo says. The evidence is strong. I recommend you take a plea rather than going to jury trial, but that's your decision. I'll plead guilty, Harlan says, to whatever charge you want to bring. I did kill Petra Lindgren. I did it to protect the town. I'd do it again. Restrepo places the evidence back in her folder. That's noted. We walk toward the door and Harlan speaks one more time. Tell Desmond I understand, he says. His voice is quiet now, not peaceful anymore, but something adjacent to sadness. Tell him that the old guard will need to find someone else to maintain the binding now. Tell him that I know what I've cost the town. I pause at the door. Why did you do this? The psychometric reading showed you didn't do it out of rage or fear. You did it out of something that felt like love. Because I love this town, Harlan says simply. I love the people in it. I love the history that brought me here. And I love the convergence itself, the power of it, the strangeness of it, the fact that we've been able to keep it contained and stable for 2 centuries. And someone was going to destroy that because of intellectual curiosity. So you made the choice that Petra's life mattered less than the convergence's protection, I say. Yes, Harlan says. He extends his wrists slightly, reminding us both that his hands are almost in handcuffs already, almost imprisoned, almost paying the price for his decision. And I'll carry that choice for the rest of my life. I understand the cost of what I did. I just believe the cost was necessary. We leave him there in the interview room, and Restrepo and I drive back to Crabapple Bend in silence. The harbor is gray when we arrive, the water churning with the beginning of the winter storm system that's been building offshore. He's not going to apologize, Restrepo says as we pull into the parking lot. He's not going to express remorse in a way that satisfies the legal system. He's going to maintain that he did the right thing until he dies. I know, I say. That's going to make the trial messy. The prosecutor wants someone who's sorry for what they did. Harlan's going to stand there and defend his decision. He'll still plead guilty? Yes. But he'll do it while explaining that he had no choice, because his value system prioritized the town's survival over Petra's life, which is going to make a lot of people very angry. I think about Petra's brilliant mind, already lost. I think about Harlan's hands on the ward stones, maintaining something that was worth killing for. I think about the fact that both of those things are true, and the truth contains no clear answer for what justice should look like. The trial starts in 3 weeks, Restrepo says. After that, everything changes. The binding becomes something people have to know about. Even if we frame it as geological secrets, people will figure out there's more to the story. I know, I say. Are you ready for that? I think about Quill and his fierce certainty that justice matters more than protection. I think about Petra and her brilliant research that no one will ever see published. I think about Harlan and his love for a town that's about to fracture over whether his love justified his choice. No, I tell Restrepo, but I'm going to do it anyway. She nods like she expected that answer. She's probably been expecting it since the moment I touched Harlan's cottage and felt the psychometric signature of someone who killed for love. By evening, word has spread through the town's magical community. Harlan has been arrested. The trial is happening. The binding is about to be exposed, at least partially. At least in a way that people might understand if they're willing to believe in impossible things. Desmond calls an emergency gathering of the old guard, and Nolan asks me to sit in on it because he thinks they need to hear from someone who still believes that justice matters, even when justice is complicated. The meeting is tense. People arrive in hushed voices, their expressions hard. They know what's coming. They know that Harlan's trial is going to open doors that have been closed for 200 years. And they're trying to decide whether that's an acceptable cost for seeing one of their members go to prison. By the end of the night, the old guard has decided to cooperate with Restrepo's case. They'll allow the evidence into trial. They'll let Harlan's conviction happen. They'll accept the exposure of the binding's existence. But they've also decided that Petra's research will remain hidden, that Kai will become the keeper of knowledge that can never be published, that the town's magical secret will be protected even as Harlan's guilt is exposed. It's a compromise. It's not justice. But it's what passes for justice in a town built on magical foundations and 200 years of sustained secrets. Chapter 15. Arrest. The arrest happens at dawn, which feels inevitable in a way that early morning light often does, like the universe is underlining something important. Restrepo's patrol car pulls up to Harlan's cottage at 6:15 a.m. It's supposed to be symbolic, probably. Early arrest, early resolution, the town catching its breath before the bigger revelations come. It doesn't really work that way, but the symbolism is there anyway. I'm watching from the dock when Harlan comes out of his cottage. He's dressed the same way he was when we last visited him at the detention center. Fishing clothes, practical, the uniform of someone who's spent his entire life on the water. He comes to Restrepo without resistance, without drama, without the performative defiance that people sometimes use to make their convictions seem noble. He just walks, and his hands extend, and the handcuffs click into place. The harbor watches. Wren is on the dock, and her expression is complicated. Not just grief, but the specific grief that comes from watching someone you knew become a criminal. Kai sits on the dock steps, and he's crying quietly, relieved to be finally cleared from suspicion, but burdened by his own guilt about selling Petra's data. Both of them are wearing the weight of their connection to Petra's death in different ways. Restrepo reads Harlan his rights, and his silence is complete. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't explain. He just accepts the gravity of the moment and the gravity of his choice. "I did what was necessary," he says, one final time as Restrepo is placing him in the car. His voice carries across the harbor, reaches the fishing boats, reaches the tide pool stairs, reaches everyone who might be paying attention to the harbor's rhythm. The town will understand that eventually. History will understand. The car drives away, and the harbor settles back into its normal winter morning routine. Fishing boats continue their preparation. Tourists begin arriving for the day. The world doesn't pause, despite the fact that it should. Despite the fact that one of the town's oldest families just had their protector carted away in the back of a patrol vehicle. I walk back to the Fossick, and Nolan appears in my doorway around 8 a.m., like he's been waiting for the moment when the arrest became real and irrevocable. "It's over," he says. "It's not a question." "It's the beginning," I tell him. "The trial starts in 3 weeks. Everything comes out. The binding becomes something people know about, even if they don't believe it's real." Nolan sits down heavily in one of the reading chairs. He looks exhausted in a way that goes deeper than physical tiredness, the exhaustion of someone who's been carrying a burden and just realized the burden isn't going to go away even now that Harlan has been arrested. The binding is weaker than it should be, he says quietly. Vernon's death created a crack that I've been trying to maintain alone, and now that crack is getting worse. The convergence is pressing harder. The ward stones are straining. What happens if the binding fails? Natural disasters. Probably. Earthquakes if we're lucky. Tsunamis if we're not. The convergence is a nexus point where multiple layers of magical power intersect. Letting that loose would be like opening a dam and hoping the water doesn't destroy everything downstream. So you need help maintaining it, I say. I need another practitioner with water magic expertise. I need someone willing to spend their life maintaining something that they can't talk about. I need someone willing to accept that part of maintaining the binding is sometimes making terrible choices to protect it. The implication is clear. Harlan killed Petra to protect the binding, and the binding is going to need someone else to kill to protect it eventually. That's just what protection requires when the thing you're protecting is dangerous enough to destroy civilization. The old guard will help, Nolan says. They're reorganizing, recruiting, understanding that they need more bodies to maintain what Harlan was helping to maintain. But they're going to do it quietly. They're going to continue protecting the binding without the public ever knowing about it. So nothing changes, I say. Harlan goes to prison, the town's magical community gets reorganized, and the binding continues to be maintained by people willing to make terrible choices to protect it. That's what protection requires, Nolan says. Sometimes. I don't have an answer for that. So instead, I spend the rest of the day working with Restrepo to prepare for the trial. We organize evidence, we coordinate witness testimony, we build a legal case against a man who's guilty and unapologetic and genuinely believed he was doing necessary work. By the time the fog arrives this evening, the arrest has become old news. The town has moved forward. Life continues. Harlan is gone, and the harbor adjusts to his absence with the kind of resignation that comes from losing someone who was always half hidden anyway. That evening, Kai appears at the Fossick, and I can see the weight of his own choice settling on him. The realization that he's going to spend the rest of his life as a keeper of knowledge that can never be published. I want to work with Desmond, Kai says, permanently. Not just research, but real commitment to maintaining and protecting Petra's findings. You understand what that means? I ask. Yes. It means my academic career is over. It means everything I research gets locked away. It means I dedicate my life to something that no one will ever know I did. That's a heavy choice. It's the only choice I have left, Kai says. I sold her data. I'm complicit in her death even if I didn't kill her. And I can't fix that. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure that research is protected and preserved, even if it's hidden. Desmond will accept you, I tell him. I know. He already said yes. He said I was exactly the kind of person he needed, someone who understands the cost of keeping secrets and is willing to pay it. After Kai leaves, the shop is quiet. Just me and Quill, and the knowledge that everything is about to change. The trial will expose the binding's existence. The town will fracture over whether Harlan's choice was justified. And life in Crabapple Bend will never be quite as simple as it was before. Quill climbs into my lap, and we sit together in the gathering darkness. Outside, the fog is thickening. The winter storm is building. And somewhere under the water, the convergence is pulsing, waiting, pressing against boundaries that are holding but weakening. By tomorrow, everyone will know that Harlan Tate killed Petra Lindgren. By the end of the month, everyone will understand that there was a reason connected to the town's magical infrastructure, a reason that made the murder something other than simple. The question that will haunt all of us is whether that reason makes it forgivable. Chapter 16. Thaw. 2 weeks after Harlan's arrest, the weather shifts. The fog becomes less aggressive. It arrives in the evening, settles gently over the town instead of wrapping around it like a warning. The winter storm system that's been building offshore turns north, choosing to spare Crabapple Bend the worst of its violence. The crabapple tree in Crabapple Square, which bloomed out of season when something significant was coming, returns to dormancy. Its branches stand bare against the December sky, resting, preparing for whatever comes next. Nolan tells me the convergence has stopped its erratic behavior. The binding is stable again, though he says the stability is fragile, a balance maintained by people working in silence, maintaining ward stones that are getting older and more difficult to repair. Petra's family arrives to collect her research equipment. They're confused about the official story. Drowning accident. Rare tragedy on a dangerous coast. But they don't ask hard questions. They take her equipment and her memory and leave us with the weight of collective deception. A woman who was brilliant and curious and deserved better than the town we gave her. Kai continues his research under the supervision of Desmond. He spends his days in the library's restricted collection, documenting everything about the convergence while signing documents that legally bind him to silence. He's found his purpose, being the keeper of knowledge that will never be shared, the researcher who spends his career on work no one will ever see. The prosecutor's case against Harlan is solid. He doesn't fight it. His lawyer suggested a plea to avoid a public trial, and Harlan accepted it without negotiation. 10 years minimum, which means he'll be in his 70s when he's eligible for release, if he's even alive then. The old guard has gone silent in a way that suggests they're regrouping, reevaluating, understanding that their methods of protection have become visible in ways they can't undo. But they're also reorganizing, recruiting new people, training new caretakers, understanding that the binding needs more than one person to maintain it. They'll adapt, because organizations like that always do. For now, though, there's shock in the town's magical community. The trial happens, and the motive comes out. Petra's research was mapping the binding's underwater architecture. Not intentionally, but with the kind of precision that comes from brilliant analysis and methodical attention to detail. The prosecutor frames it as historical preservation concerns, and everyone who wants to believe in the surface explanation accepts that. The convergence is described as a unique geological feature that the town's old families have been protecting. No mention of magic. No mention of what the convergence actually is or what it could do if unleashed. It's a version of the truth that's technical and incomplete, and it's enough. Harlan is convicted. Justice is satisfied, or at least a version of justice that doesn't require too many people to admit that they believe in things that shouldn't be possible. I'm closing the Fossick on a December evening 3 weeks after the verdict. The fog is particularly beautiful tonight. Thin enough to see through, dense enough to look substantial. The harbor beyond the window is dark and quiet. The fishing boats are tied securely. The winter has settled into something almost peaceful. Nolan appears in the doorway without knocking. It's become a habit of his, showing up in the moments when I'm most vulnerable, most uncertain, most in need of someone who understands the specific weight of Crabapple Bend's secrets. "I want to apologize," he says without preamble, "for keeping secrets, for not warning Petra about the Guardians when I suspected something might happen, for making you carry the weight of this alone." I set down the register book I've been closing, and I look at him properly for the first time in weeks. He's thinner than he was. The weight of maintaining the binding has carved new lines into his face. "I want to apologize too," I tell him, "for suspecting you, for not seeing how much the binding's weakness was costing you, for asking you to be okay when you weren't." "We're not good at this," Nolan says. "No," I agree. We're both people who learn to manage complicated situations by compartmentalizing and not asking for help. We're both control freaks who are slowly learning that some things can't be controlled. So what do we do? Nolan asks. We show up, I say. We keep showing up, even when it's hard. We tell each other the truth, even when the truth is complicated. We try not to break each other. Nolan reaches out and takes my hand. It's honest and imperfect, and something shifts between us. Not resolution, not a grand declaration, but the beginning of real trust. We're two people who've both been burned by secrets, and we're both willing to risk being hurt again. Quill, from his perch on the shop counter, sends a blast of feeling impression that can only be interpreted as Hedgehog judgment mixed with resignation. He's lost a turf war with Nolan's heron familiar. Barnacle decided that the filing cabinet in the harbor master's office was acceptable territory, and Quill has chosen not to pursue the matter further. He's accepting defeat with the kind of grace that comes from understanding that some battles aren't worth fighting. Your hedgehog is staring at me with pure disapproval, Nolan says. He's worried about you breaking my heart, I say, which is probably not true but feels like the kind of thing that needs to be said out loud anyway. I'm worried about the same thing, Nolan says, but I'm going to try not to. We stand in the doorway of the Fossick as the fog thickens around us, and the world becomes smaller and more contained. Somewhere in the brackenwood, the self-rearranging forest shifts and reorganizes itself. Somewhere under the water, the convergence pulses with power that's both dangerous and essential. And somewhere out at the edge of town, the crabapple tree blooms again. Just one branch. Just a few flowers unfurling against the winter sky. Not quite spring. Not yet. But coming. The next mystery. The next death. The next truth that will need protecting or revealing depending on who you ask. The flowers are too early. They shouldn't bloom in December. But the crabapple tree has always operated according to its own logic, and I've learned not to question the timing of things that bloom when they shouldn't. What does it mean? Nolan asks. The tree blooming again? Something's coming, I say. Something that needs investigating. Something that will require difficult choices and harder truths. Are you ready for that? I think about Harlan and his love for a town that was worth killing for. I think about Petra and her brilliant research that no one will ever see published. I think about the binding and the cost of maintaining something that powerful and dangerous. No, I tell Nolan, but I'm going to do it anyway. He squeezes my hand once, understanding that's the only answer either of us will ever be able to give. We stand in the doorway of the Fossick as the fog thickens around us, and the hand in mine becomes the only solid thing in a world that's made of secrets and uncertain truths. Behind us, Quill settles into sleep on the shop counter. Outside, the harbor continues its patient work of containing the ocean. And under the water, the ward stones hold, maintained by people whose names will never be known, whose sacrifice will never be public, whose love for this town has taken shapes they never anticipated. For now, though, there is just the fog and the hand in mine and the harbor beyond, where Nolan's practiced water magic makes the impossible look simple. There is just this moment, imperfect and uncertain and absolutely necessary. Not yet, but coming. The thaw is just beginning.
Thank you for listening. Please visit me at winvalentine.com to stay up to date. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and review.